I'm Cornelius Troost, the author of Apes or Angels, Darwin, Dover, Human Nature and Race. And as I told you previously, this is a highly controversial book. Much of it is not. However, it does deal with the issue of racial differences, which is a hot, controversial topic, and something which is, in a politically correct environment, a no-no. We're not supposed to talk about it. Darwin, however, as I told you previously, had a second dangerous idea about human differences. And at that time, it was essentially overlooked. And that is that other than professionals talking about it in the West, there was no big issue made out of it, and it eventually went underground because of Adolf Hitler and his final solution, which was based on the idea of Aryan supremacy, and which really changed history, because anybody who talked about eugenics or ways of improving humankind through genetic means, either directly or indirectly, was considered criminal after Hitler. So therefore, anything related to the topic of race became anathema. You were stigmatized if you even discussed it openly, and it went essentially underground. So somehow or other, the opposite happened. That is that scientists began to, especially the social sciences, they began to dominate the field and talk about humankind essentially in terms of a model that gave the environment practically 100% of the power to mold what we become. And psychology, sociology, economics, all of these fields were oriented towards an environmental model and rarely, if ever, mentioned genetics. On the other hand, there were anthropologists in physical anthropology who did thoroughly scientific work on fossils, and who were able to essentially make some progress in elucidating how humans appeared on the earth in terms of a rough sequence, how they evolved, and also they were able to delineate many of the anatomical differences among these various groups of humans over the past roughly 3 million years or so. And so anthropology still made progress in certain fields, even though, as I said, the doctrine of environmentalism dominated most of their publications and their outlook on human nature. So it came to a head approximately around 1960, when Carlton Kuhn, who was president of the American Anthropological Association, had published a book on the human races, which created a lot of controversy naturally, and which made him persona non grata. He left the organization and basically disappeared over a few years. And the 1960s, of course, was dominated in part by the civil rights movement, as well as other major events, including Vietnam. And so there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of social change, and a shift in politics towards the left in a very big way. And education itself was strongly influenced by this shift to the left. One example would be that the emphasis on child's rights and on making children happy, on self-esteem education, these movements were accentuated during the 60s and into the 70s. And so we had a really strong headwind of environmentalism rushing through the 60s, even at the same time that the work that was done in the biological sciences at the federal level in terms of grants and institutes developing new curricula really brought Darwin back to life, brought Darwin back into the high school curriculum, and reminded people that he existed and that his ideas were very interesting. Thus we had a slow, gradual, eventual meeting of two ways of thinking. One, the environmentalist model from the social sciences, which was even dominant in the biological sciences into the 60s. The other was the new, emerging, and ever accelerating field of genetics, which into the 80s and 90s just simply grew almost exponentially. The progress was enormous, and the field of genetics, as embodied in E.O. Wilson, professor of biology at Harvard University, and really one of the greatest naturalists in terms of writing about nature. His books have sold vast amounts of copies, and he's well known. But E.O. Wilson had the audacity to introduce more genetics into the field of biology and into the study of human nature. The new field he designed was called sociobiology. He did a textbook on it, and he advocated the examination of the genetic basis for all kinds of animal behavior, including human behavior. This was too much for the extreme liberals in the sciences. People like Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin were profoundly upset by this audacious move. Various students, in fact, abused E.O. Wilson. He got a lot of nasty mail, and he was had ice water thrown in his face at one meeting, all because he believed in a genetic foundation, which is certainly in the great spirit of Darwinian biology. So we end up with the real issue of genetics finding its place in the biological sciences. It was the amount of research in the as I said, in the 80s and 90s was accelerating so much that inevitably genetics became a major part of the biological sciences, and today it actually dominates. Most of the brightest young biologists go into genetics for good reason. It has a very powerful analytic aspect. The human genome was analyzed in full by 2003, and now we are doing the HapMap study, which is a major international effort to analyze the genomes of assorted groups around the world to develop better insights into racial differences, human early history, and so on. We'll continue this next time.